The Trader Cobb Crypto Show, talking business in blockchain.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Trader Cobb Crypto Podcast, where I have with me some breaking bank royalty. And we're going to get into exactly what I mean by that in just a minute, but it's Brett King. Now, he is the founder and executive chairman of Moven, which is an online banking or personalized banking application to help you keep an eye on everything that's going on within your finances. And it is an absolute behemoth. So, Brett, thank you for being on the show.
It's great to be with you, and thanks for letting me join all the way from New York City, baby.
Yeah, New York City, but ladies and gentlemen, most of you, or I know a lot of you have got Australians, so we've got a lot of Australians in the audience. You'll actually note that after a long, long period of time, Brett here still has his Australian accent. Well done for that, mate. Well done for that. We are still relatively unique, and you still have that accent, so that's good for you.
It does work for me. My speaker agent, he reckons I probably make about 15% a year more cash because of the accent, so I keep it. But I did notice that when I'm with an Aussie talking, it definitely comes out more. But because I lived in Hong Kong for 7 years and Dubai for almost 5 years, and in those two markets where English is a second language, you do tend to see the accent does get a bit thinner because you have to articulate a bit more clearly, and you lose a lot of the idioms. So a lot of the slang. For example, I remember when I was in Hong Kong and I came to the office one day and someone said, "You don't look so good. Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm feeling a bit crook." And they're like, "You're feeling like a thief?" They didn't get the nuance. So, so you have to eliminate some of those idioms from the language over time.
Well, I've been there, done that with my time away as well. You notice when you're over there, they say you've got the thickest Australian accent I've ever heard. And then when you come back home, they go, "You're English." But anyway.
Yeah. And my auntie always says, "You sound so posh," because I've lost my accent. But
yeah, I got that when I got back as well. Now, look, I want to get into what you've created here because it's no small feat. But before we go into Moving, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to creating this particular business?
Well, I started my career in Australia as a bike ripper, as a programmer, many moons ago. But I sort of had that unique skill of being able to communicate between business people and technologists, which has done me well throughout the career. I then in '99 I moved to Hong Kong. At the time, I headed up Deloitte's business practice in Asia. I was specializing in financial services and banking as an industry, but and had a ton of experience in that, but really was doing the e-push. So I worked on the first stock trading platform called 2Cube in Hong Kong at the time. I launched a bunch of internet banking initiatives, for major players in the region. Did the first online credit card.
Oh wow!
For Citibank, in the region, etc. So worked on a lot of that really grassroots digital stuff. Then 2005, I wrote a report for HSBC on the next 15, 20 years. It was entitled HSBC 2.0. And that ended up becoming sort of the skeleton of what became the first book, Bank 2.0, which I've got some artwork up on the wall for. That was my first book, and it went off and did well. And then as I was on the book tour, doing the book signing for Bank 2, I was actually in LA at a networking breakfast held by this radio personality, media guy out there called Ken Ratowski. I was doing the book signing, and people were asking me about what does a bank account of the future look like? And I was describing it, and there was a guy there from a venture capital organization, Clearstone Ventures, his name William Quigley. And he was like, "Yeah, but banks aren't going to do this. So who's going to do it?" And, literally 2 hours after that networking session, I went home and registered the domain for Moven Bank.
Well, isn't it interesting how these things come about? They hit you in the face sometimes, and sometimes you don't realize what you're about to sort of embark on, do you? They just sort of...
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
you were
so
on a bank term. When was that? When was it that you? I know
so
you.
I finished writing Bank 2.0 on Christmas Day 2009. I was
2009. Wow.
so I'd just come back from Dubai. I was spending some time between Australia and Hong Kong at the time before I moved to the US in 2010. And yeah, that was so. The book actually came out in April 2010. And I just did my sixth book, Bank 4.0, which was obviously one of the sequels to Bank 2, and that came out in December in the US, a bit earlier in sort of the rest of the world. And then 2015, the most successful book I've done previously was actually sort of a full futurist book called Augmented Life in the Smart Lane. So that was
Augmented life in the smart lane.
yeah. So Augmented was the title.
Then your
Yeah.
1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I mean,
Exactly.
let's be honest.
Yeah.
You
But that's
got to
been
get
the bread
creative
and
on that
butter.
one. Huh? You got some help on that title, didn't you?
Yeah, that's the bread and butter, though.
Oh, excellent. Well, look, one thing I want to ask you, we're going to get into that futurist stuff because I'm really interested in it. I really, really am. I want to know how you sort of title yourself as being a futurist and what it means and how you do it. But before we do that, I mean, with moving, you have really been, I'm going to do it, making moves. I was going to say moving, but I couldn't. I wasn't going to go that bad. I do have two kids, so I am allowed to make bad dad jokes, but that would have just been next level.
You could have done the themes, the song out of, what is it? The, was it?
Oh, you can't forget now.
You like to move and move.
Oh, I was going to do that. Was what was on the tip of my tongue. My kids love that song. But you've been busy and you've got, I mean, how many users have you got across the app now?
So we got in the US where we operate as a bank, direct to consumer with our own debit card and so forth. We have 250,000 app users there. Some of them have debit cards. Some of them use it for aggregation, sort of like a PFM type tool. The behavior sort of differs. Some use it as their only bank account. Then we have licensed our technology to other banks around the world. So Westpac in New Zealand, TD Canada, Yandex Money, which is sort of PayPal in Russia, BCA, Bank Central Asia in Indonesia, etc. And so we're rolling out right now. We're in 7 geographies. We're rolling out to about 70 million users right now in those different geographies. So, and we've got 2 new geographies coming online over the next 60 to 90 days.
That's absolutely insane. And I mean, did you find that traction with the app and the bank and the whole business? Did you find it was instantly successful? I mean, you do hear these stories, but most of the time in startup land, it's usually more often than not, you're just about to fall over before you actually get up. Did you find instant success, or did it take some time?
No, definitely. Look, definitely took time. When we launched, we were only the second sort of challenger bank in the world at the time when we launched, and raising money for a challenger bank in those days was tough because, you'd go out to Silicon Valley and they'd say, yeah, we're looking for the Facebook of banking and we want to really see something that's going to have 1 billion users. And we're like, do you guys understand about regulation in the financial services industry? You need a banking license. Oh, no, we don't think, So they didn't get that. So they were sort of looking for that sort of scalability. And the guys that would have invested in banks, they didn't really see the fintech opportunity. So it was a little early. But we did a bunch of firsts. We were the first app to allow you to sign up for a bank account in an app. We were the first app to introduce a contactless capability. This was prior to Apple Pay and Samsung Pay. We actually issued people with contactless stickers they could put on the back of their smartphone and stuff. So, we broke some ground. But I can tell you, leading up to the Series A, and I know the sort of whole team took we paused our salaries for a few weeks before the cash came into the bank, and then when we did a commercial deal with TD on Christmas Day 2016. We actually received the cash, or the day after. Huge support from them. They've been a really strategic partner for us. But I think our monthly burn at the time was about 600K a month, and I think we had 16,000 left in the bank account when the the first tranche of 12 million bucks hit from TD. So, and
Oh.
that was with a bridge with some bridge financing we had in place as well. So, look, anyone who tells you that startup life, entrepreneurial life is easier, look,
Is lying.
yeah, and it's those moments where I guess it's make or break. I know you hear stories from Richard Branson and Elon Musk telling similar stories about the business moments away from imminent failure and then suddenly cash coming in, and so I certainly can identify with that.
Well, you know what? It's great to hear, because it's really good to hear those stories from a point for which, you know, being an entrepreneur and having a startup or startups, it is really tough. And I mean, they've really glamorized it a lot these days. No one talks about
They've even
failure.
glamorized the failure, though.
That's
Right?
what I mean. No one talks about failure. They always talk about the success, but it's the failure that leads to the success. And if you don't fail, and you don't if you're not on death's door, sometimes that's where your most brilliant ideas come from, or something drops in that you think, oh, someone's been telling me that, but now I can totally see how that makes sense, and you can pivot. And that's another very sexy word in startup land too, isn't it? Pivot. Everyone wants to.
Well, we did. We pivoted. I mean, the licensing of our tech to other banks was a pivot. But we still kept the original business, and that's plugged along quite nicely. But we had to go after revenue however we could in those early days.
That's it. So little boys and little girls that are listening out there, if you want to be an entrepreneur, certainly go for it, but do it when you're young. Because otherwise, look, you got two right here. If you're watching this, look at our heads. Look at our heads, okay? There's a reason for this. There is a reason, and it's not genes, let me tell you. Oh, cool. Okay, look, so you're also a futurist, which we'll touch in a second. One thing I've also found fascinating as far as breaking ground goes is that you are the first ever fintech podcast called Breaking Banks, right? Back in 2013, you were way ahead. So I can totally vouch for you being a futurist, because there wasn't a lot of people that were sort of seeing the audio space developing in the way that it has done at that time.
Yeah, in fact, we launched the podcast. I think there was a few other, like Dave Birch, who's with Consult Hyperion. Dave had a podcast he did sort of intermittently, but we were the first regular weekly fintech podcast. And then, of course, 6 months after that, we launched on radio in the AM band in the US. And so we, on WVNJ 1160 and WGCH 1490 and a few other AM stations where we syndicated. So, we actually became the first fintech radio show globally as well. And so we're in 180 countries now through podcast, with about 6.5 million unique listeners. So but even that, when Moven started to kick off, I'd been writing blogs every week, and I just started running out of time. So my idea with the podcast was actually I could just do an hour a week on the microphone, and it will save me time. And so that's how I originally thought about it. Of course, it became this whole beast of its own, right?
Well, trust me, I'm very aware of how they work, mate. I was told yesterday that I started the podcast yesterday. So happy birthday to the Trader Cobb Crypto Podcast. It's a full 1 year old now. And I mean, we were only in it for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months. And we were, as I was jumping onto a plane to New York for the Consensus event for blockchain and crypto assets. Yep. We were number one in the US business category, which is great. That's as big as, this is as far up as a podcast can get, really, globally, with ease on it. And I couldn't quite believe it. I mean, here I am interviewing Joe LeBen, who's one of the founders of the...
I know Joe. Joe's been on my show a number of times. Joe's a good guy.
He's a really good guy.
On the show as well. But actually, last time I interviewed Joe was actually in Sydney at Cyboast last year.
No, I got him at Sydney, last year as well for one of his events here with Consensus Events.
Yeah. And he's a good guy.
I understand how quickly these things can take off, and I was just saying that for me, I'm probably similar to you in the sense that I'm a communicator. I'm somebody who can communicate things, and the reason we've had success, not just in the podcast, is that we can break things down that might seem really complex and deliver them in an easy to understand way for the average consumer, shall we say. And, writing pieces for me, I write how I speak. So my business partner said to me at the time, well, why don't you just do a podcast? And I said, I'd love that. that would be good. One take, let's just get it done. Boom, boom, boom. I'm really busy all the time. As you know, everyone's always busy all the time. I would love to see my family more often. So if I can save myself 15 minutes by talking,
Yep. And you got a great face for podcasts, man.
Very much like yours, maybe a couple of years younger than you. So look, let's touch now on Futurist and tie that in with the Breaking Banks podcast. And guys, you got to listen to it, jump on board, get stuck into it. But I mean, I'm hearing this digital blockchain, digital currency space, or whatever you call it, digital distributed ledger technology, digital assets, whatnot. Now, if you're talking about a show called Breaking Banks, and you're a futurist, I'd love to hear your take on the future of two things. One is digital asset, and the other being Bitcoin.
Okay. Yeah. Well, obviously, when I started Breaking Banks, and even when I wrote Bank 2.0, I wrote about Bitcoin, but the whole DLT stuff was still fairly new. It was certainly starting to gain some traction. You'll laugh at this. I had Charlie Shrem on the show the day before he went in for his enforced holiday.
Oh, wow.
He came into the studio and very graciously gave me some time. That same day as he came into the studio, HSBC had done this massive deal, $1.7 billion fine for anti-money laundering. And so it was sort of really bittersweet. But I met Charlie, in the New York community, probably early 2011. Bitcoin was still very raw back then.
Oh yeah.
But of course, a lot has happened to mature the sector. We've had the rise of the token stuff that blew up in a huge way. It's now normalized a little bit, but ultimately, I think if you look at crypto, in respect to currencies, and we'll leave that away from sort of the database evolution.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
It really what it's about, I think, is the fact that the markets as a whole are shifting from physical value chains, physical assets, physical commodities as the core underpinning, to now we're seeing the emergence of digital markets and digital value exchange. And part of that is actually, I think, going to be a fundamental shift in basic economics 101 supply and demand curve. Because in a world where you have AI-driven ecosystems, the old supply and demand curve doesn't work, because if you've got an AI, once that AI kicks in, then essentially, with the exception of maybe processor cycles, you can reach infinite demand with that same supply capability with the AI. And so you don't generate increased labor participation as a result of increased demand. And that's a core shift. So as that occurs, the market's going to have to look for value in different ways. And I think that's where we're looking for digitization of assets, digitization of commodities, data as a as a core value proposition, for example, and the ability to sort of process that data. That's all part of this new digital market that is essentially emerging. And so what we saw with the tokens is very similar to what occurred after the South Sea bubble, with the formation of stock markets and the formalization of that. So it does have parallels. To be a futurist, you have to really be a good student of history, because you have to see how people have responded to these things in the past and try and find those same analogies. And that's really what I take away from it, is that very similar to what we saw with the foundation of the formal financial markets and the way we valued companies in the past, and the way the commodities markets were created. We see the same occurring right now in the digital space.
And do you see it? I mean, look, staying with currencies for the second, thank you for that. That's a very well broken down. It's very clear that you are a communicator. It's a very clear breakdown as to what the two different, I guess it's a fork in there. There's currency, and then there's other technology that sort of branches off that, with the data banks and whatnot. So, I mean, Bitcoin, of course, it has had a a head start. Okay, it's the big dog. It is the biggest market capitalization, the most frequently used, the most frequently understood. Okay, globally. So, do you think that Bitcoin, if you're looking at it as a startup, does it have a first mover advantage in the currency space, or do you think it still leaves a lot to be desired, and anything can be taken over if it falls asleep? We saw that with like the taxis, with Uber coming through. But what do you think on that?
Well, the biggest, when Bitcoin came out, I was speaking to John, chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation. What was his name? I'm looking this up as we're speaking. John Matonis. That's right. Speaking to John about this, at the time, and he was, the founding director of the Bitcoin Foundation. And I was saying to him about, if you're trying to replace currency, I get Bitcoin's value, the value exchange proposition. If you look at the formation of physical currency, that was largely driven by the need to create a standardized value exchange by geography. But we live in a world today where value exchange needs to be global, needs to be at the speed of light on the internet and so forth. So it's fairly obvious, if it wasn't Bitcoin, it would have been something like Bitcoin that emerged. But, John was talking to me about, the sort of devaluation of currencies and the way Bitcoin had been designed, and moving to the right side of the decimal point, and all that sort of stuff. But the problem with Bitcoin from a design perspective was that people kept talking about the $1 million Bitcoin, and that produced speculation. Yeah. And so it then turned into a digital asset instead of a currency, because people were holding the money instead of using it. So it was acting more like gold than it was a US dollar. And so that, I think, is a design flaw. Now, you might have a stage where you get to some sort of normalization in terms of value, where then people say, well, we could use Bitcoin as a currency again. And I think that, I would love to see that happen. But probably what happens next is that, Bitcoin 2.0, whatever that's going to be, and I don't think it's Ethereum, I think what's happening at EOS is interesting, things like that. But if we're going to start again from scratch, using the lessons we've learned from Bitcoin, you would really focus on utility. You would say, how do you get a cryptocurrency that, where you can maximize utility, where people want to spend it, where people want to use it as this underpinning of transactional activity?
So any plans to have a Moven token?
No, we looked at it, but in being a, quote unquote bank in the US regulated market, just even, custody has sort of still got a question mark over it. And so, we are interested in it. We did look definitely at a token, but for us to really build a utility token into Moven, given that we're dealing with financial transactions, was a bit tougher than a non-related industry. My favorite token is actually probably the Sun Exchange. I don't know if you heard of them, but they run a solar business. They, for every kilowatt of energy they produce on the solar panels, they produce a token. I think that's a great example of a utility-based token that is with really clearly defined value, that doesn't conflate it with, like a securities mechanism, right?
Yeah, there's been a really big rise in that sector, in the energy sector, renewables. Obviously, we do have an energy issue definitely here in Australia. Just it's basically price gouging. It's a monopoly. It's disgusting. They know it's going to end, so they're making as much money as they possibly can, as fast as they possibly can, and they're going, screw you all. We'll do what we want, because the gravy train is starting to come into the station, I think, as we do see the world sort of learning to be a little bit less stupid. I mean, I love David Attenborough's pieces. I have my kids watch him all the time. And at the end of his, the ocean one, I can't remember what it was called, Blue Planet, I think it was called. He said, never have we been at a time where we've had so much information about the climate, knowing that we're affecting it, and never have we been at the time where we're in the position to actually make changes. And it's up to us to make those changes. And I get goosebumps when I watch him say that, sitting there next to my daughter thinking, you're the generation that, you and us, and it's us. If we can't contain this and fix this, it's all over for, your kids. It's going to continually get worse. And we are starting.
But coal is good for humanity. No, I'm just joking.
Just for getting us where we are.
No. Look, ultimately, right now you have this again, the digital asset thing. Solar is much better placed to be considered a digital asset, right? Okay, you've got to work out storage problems and so forth, but the reality is solar is already the cheapest form of energy production, available in the world. It's cheaper than all of the fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, unsubsidized solar. In 10 years, it's going to be 1/10 of the price, if not lower, than the cost of coal-based electricity. So how can an economy based on coal compete? It cannot.
No, it can't.
And so, Australia is the perfect it's the perfect economy for solar. There's energy issues there. You're paying 26 to 32 cents a kilowatt hour for energy in Australia. Yep. I mean, we're seeing contracts written at 1.5 cents right now for solar generation. I mean, it's already 1/20th of the price.
Yeah.
You've got solar silica, so you could do solar cell productions there. Really, there's no excuse. There's no excuse.
Poor leadership.
Going down that path. I would invest in solar if you're listening.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot going on in Adelaide, of all places, right now. They are the forward-thinking state.
Elon Musk got in there with the storage, but there's some really interesting tech. Here's a futurist hat, in terms of storage mediums that are emerging pretty rapidly now. Molten salt. Which can generate
I read that.
And ammonia-based storage systems and other things like that. So there is a lot of dollars being thrown at that. You've also got some really interesting solar tech. Bill and Melinda Gates have worked on solar panels that, in addition to generating energy, extract clean water from the air. Using sort of the same tech, so there's incredible leaps and bounds being made in this. China last year, you want to know why it's a problem for Australia, China's pursuit of this versus coal. China last year installed 96 gigawatts of solar generation capacity. That is the equivalent of the entire install base of the United States in terms of solar, but it took the US 45 years to get there. China did it in 1 year. So you know where the future is. If China's betting big on it like that, and they've stopped all new coal plant production in China.
They've cut the coal purchases from their biggest Australian mine here. And the Australian government, get this is how backward we are, okay? This is why you haven't come back. I get it. The Australian government has turned around and gone, hang on, we're just going to investigate whether that's legal or not. It's like, hang on. Because they said, look, we realize that there's problems in the climate, so we're going to start bullshit. Come on, let's cut the crap. You're doing it because it suits you, and that's cool. What suits you suits the planet. If it's in that realm, that's fine. And Australian government's now going, hang on, we're checking if that's illegal. It's like, come on, mate. Stop worrying about all this coal business that's going to die. Invest in your future, not your next term. And I think the issue is it's the short-term political mindset here in Australia, because we've had so many prime ministers and leaders in the last 8 years, I've lost count of them.
No, dude, I live in the US where Donald Trump is president.
True. I guess, well, you haven't really, I suppose.
And climate change is a Chinese conspiracy, according to Trump.
Okay, my government might be, let's say collectively our government.
Yeah.
I'll put you in that bucket.
Really the US and Australia are quite exceptional in respect to their denial of climate change at the government level.
Yeah.
And I think in the future it will, historically, it will be seen quite negatively, unfortunately. But this is the opportunity for the next generation.
It absolutely is. We are.
They need to be setting policy. They need to be involved in that, and that's that's where the change will come.
Well, this is what I find so interesting and exciting about this digital asset space. Okay, so there's two spaces that I look into, or I was looking into at the time when we took this business on and started setting this up. One was gaming, because gaming was taking control and blowing the whole world up, and it still is. It's an amazing economy. It's an amazing new sports realm. I'm still blown away by it. And one of my good friends who ran a startup out of Australia, he's now actually gone into the gaming sector. He'd been a professional or semi-professional gamer before. But I was fascinated by that. Sorry?
Who's that?
His name's Jamie Skeller.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, ran a company called Horizon State, voting on the blockchain.
No, I've been doing some work with a startup out of Sydney called Play Up, and they have a token which is geared. Their token is actually the Play chip that they can use on the gaming platform. But they do sports betting. But one of the fastest growing use on the platform is actually the Twitch betting and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, the gaming associated sponsorship and betting and all that other stuff that comes along with it is huge. Kids don't sit down and watch motor racing like the Bathurst 500. They'll sit down and watch a Fortnite championship.
Yep.
It's a massive business.
And speaking of kids, you just hit my next segue on the head. Normally my shows go for 20 minutes to half an hour, but this is going very well and I'm enjoying it. So bugger the rules. We're going to do what we want right here. But the final subject is to touch on this millennials point of thing, because that's the future, right? Let's talk about that for a minute. You talked about the kids playing games. The kids I talked about before, the kids that are in crypto and blockchain. These are kids. Now these kids are the kids of the later generation or the mid-generation baby boomer cycle, which is the first real, apart from the industrial revolution, the first real step up of a middle class and wealth seen not just in the higher echelon, the 1%, but that 1% grew out to more people had access to money, education, growth, and prosperity. These are the kids of these people. Now they're short, they've got not much patience, they're pretty entitled, and they can be a pain in the backside to employ. But let me tell you one thing, they are the biggest voting demographic moving forward right now. They're smart, they're powerful, they know how to use technology because they've had it in their hands since they were bloody born. So investing and being in business with this demographic seems to make perfect sense. And you've got gaming, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. Is that something that you sort of touch on as well?
Well, I talk about it in Augmented. I talk about the Omega generation, the last generation. In terms of this cycle of baby boomers, Gen X, and so forth. And there's a great Marshall McLuhan quote which says, I don't know who first discovered water, but it probably wasn't a fish. And the reason I use that is that kids don't think of digital as digital. It's water to them. It's just around them and part of it. And so they're much better placed to actually utilize this tech to think of these new paradigms and do this stuff, because they don't have to get over the traditional way of doing things. And so you've got a lot of real creativity coming out of this sector with these millennials and the Gen Zs that come after them, where their ideation process in terms of creation, their social collaboration, all of those things are quite different because of the way they've come into the world around digital. We still have debates, you see it in the press all the time. Should our kids be allowed to use their devices all the time and, all this sort of stuff? And the reality is, if you look at history and the way we've adapted to technologies, even the radio or TV or whatever it was, the internet, smartphones, there has never been an example where the older generation has been able to successfully dampen adoption of technology. In 250 years, we've not seen a single example of a company threatened by technology shifts survive unscathed. They either innovate or they're gone. And so when you look at these technologies like crypto or say artificial intelligence, and we hear a lot of debate about what's the future going to be like. It's almost like we're debating whether or not artificial intelligence should be allowed to happen. And yet, if you look at the historical precedents, there is no example of where we have stopped implementing a technology like this and sort of said, we've got to have a think about it. Normally what we do is we go full bore ahead because the capital markets drive that type of innovation. And then we start thinking about, oh, well, people are losing jobs because of AI. What are we going to do now? And so, and the rate of change is speeding up, of course. And so, but I think if you tie all this in together, you can see this as hugely disruptive, but coming out of the other end of this, our kids go into a world that actually could be, in 30, 40 years' time, very, very different place. You're going to have healthcare, education, basic needs, basically zero cost to provide that. So Diamandis calls this the age of abundance, but where technology is provides this capability where this is just accessible. We're going to start developing technologies to geoengineer the planet and undo climate change. These could be massive social programs or massive infrastructure programs on a global basis, sort of like the New Deal, after the Second World War, and we're talking about the Green New Deal in the US right now, but it could be a global initiative. And so when you start thinking about things like universal basic income as a construct that comes out of this technology unemployment as a result of AI, that could be deployed in these massive social causes like, undoing the damage of climate change. There's so much potential for this generation. And the one thing I love about this generation is they're much more connected with each other. Sure, there is some tribalism that comes out of social, but I think they're much more socially aware on a global basis, and they're much less concerned about asset capture than just having a great experience in life. And so I think. And a lot, you'll hear a lot of baby boomers and Gen X say, yeah, but once they, have to buy their own home and once they, start having kids, that's going to change. But I really hope it doesn't. I really hope that this next generation, particularly from a policy perspective, takes those lessons into
the live life generation.
Exactly.
And with that, I think that's a perfect way to wrap this bad boy up, because that was a wonderful sort of summation of everything that we just covered, really, to a point of which you've got opportunity out there, ladies and gentlemen. You have the opportunity right now. We probably are at the most exciting period we've ever been in our modern day world, or possibly humankind ever. Never has there been more opportunity. You can start a business from your home on a laptop. I mean, you can send currency across the world, not quite so much in an instant, but very, very quickly through digital assets. It's very clear what the issues in our world are today. So if you are a young entrepreneur, if you are not even young, but an entrepreneur, you've got the ability to do whatever it is that you need to do. So go out there and have a crack. But before you do that, make sure you get across and you listen to the Breaking Banks podcast presented by the wonderful Brett King, who is the founder and executive chairman of Moven. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, Brett. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy.
Look, it's my pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity. And see you later, mate.
Excellent, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. And you keep warm out there in cold New York, my man.
Yeah, we just had 6 inches of snow last night, so
it's hot and muggy, sticky here in Sydney. But anyway, we'll leave you to it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Bye for now.
The Trader Cobb Crypto Show, talking business in blockchain.